footsteps of silence. 6 years after the divorce, he saw her again. She was walking hand in hand with a child. The child? He was Ethan's exact copy. She had kept a secret for 6 years. Now he wants the truth. But she learned to live with the silence. Toledo was vibrant that afternoon, as it rarely was. The sky, a dense blue, seemed to press down on the city's ancient rooftops with an almost solid light. The narrow streets, curved like unresolved memories, echoed with the sound of hurried footsteps from tourists and locals. Voices mixed in different languages, laughter, camera clicks, distant bells. And in the middle of that history-saturated scene was him. Ethan Cole walked aimlessly, his shoulders stiff, hands in the pockets of his gray coat, his brow slightly furrowed. His phone vibrated inside his trousers, but he didn't take it out to look. Not today. It was his divorce anniversary. 6 exact years since he signed those papers with black ink and cold hands. It wasn't that he counted, but he knew. His body knew. He'd allowed himself a walk through the old city purely by instinct, or perhaps as a punishment. He had avoided those streets since Clara left, since her name became a kind of ghost murmuring between the windows of the empty house. But something that afternoon drew him back. Maybe it was the smell of autumn, maybe the silence behind the noise, or just the weight of a loneliness that no longer surprised him. He climbed slowly up Angel Street. His eyes scanned wavy glass shop windows, moss-covered stone walls, children running with ice cream dripping down their fingers. He stopped in front of a used book stand, pulled out an old copy of Neruda, and flipped through it without reading. The paper smelled of time. The poetry, if it still lived there, no longer touched him. It was then that everything stopped. Not time, but something inside him. An invisible force turned his face to the side, as if a silent hand pushed his chin. And he saw. There, a few meters away, walking in the opposite direction, was her. Clara. The name formed in his mind with the weight of a contained blow. She hadn't seen him yet. She walked distractedly, holding the hand of a boy who must have been 5, maybe 6. The child looked around with a serene curiosity, his face slightly furrowed, his body leaning to one side as if trying to absorb the world. Ethan felt his knees give way by an inch. The child was his portrait, not a vague or generic resemblance. It was him. Those intense brown eyes, too large for his face. That slightly arched brow, like someone carrying questions he doesn't yet know how to ask. The firm chin. The way he walked, hands loose, a sure step. The slight forward tilt of his neck, as if he was always listening to what wasn't being said. Clara looked to the side and saw him. There was no fear, no scream, no running. She simply stopped for a second. Her eyes clung to his with a mute, undecipherable force. It wasn't anger, nor fear. It was something more solid, a wall of silence between two worlds that once loved each other, and who now looked at each other as strangers. Ethan took a step. His heart was beating so hard, he felt his temples throb. He opened his mouth. The word was about to come out. But the air seemed to fail. "Clara?" He tried, but the voice didn't reach his lips. She squeezed the child's hand more firmly. She looked away and started walking. Not fast, not in a hurry, but with an irreversible decision, like someone closing a door without a sound. Ethan wanted to run. He wanted to scream. He wanted to call the child's name without even knowing what it was. But his legs didn't obey. They were nailed to the ground like the roots of a rotten tree. Everything inside him was shouting, but his body refused to react. The crowd grew. Tourists with colorful hats, students with backpacks, a couple laughing loudly, a dog barking, and in seconds, She was gone. Disappeared like smoke in the middle of the street. He searched with his eyes everywhere, turned his body, searched desperately, but there was no sign. Neither of the woman, nor the child. Nothing. Only the echo of a life he didn't know existed. He leaned against a stone wall, trying to breathe. His chest hurt, not like a heart attack, but as if someone had opened his ribs with bare hands and ripped something out from inside. He was sweating cold. His hands were trembling. He tried to rationalize. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe the child just resembled him. Children look alike. It wasn't certainty, but then he remembered the eyes. Those brown eyes, identical to his own when he was the same age. And there was no way to pretend. Ethan Cole, a recognized architect, son of one of the most influential families in Castilla-La Mancha, was stopped in the middle of the street like an ordinary man, before an old wound that never healed, and which was now bleeding again, deeper, dirtier, more real, dirtier. More, a man who had everything, then lost everything, and now discovered that maybe he had never known anything. The city continued around him as if nothing had happened, because to the world, truly, nothing happened. Just another man standing in front of a book stand, just another pale face in the crowd, just another story no one saw happen. But for him, right there, in that instant, reality had cracked. And through that crack, he saw something he couldn't unsee. Before the crack, the betrayal. 6 years earlier, before the crack, before the silence, before Mateo, there was a woman trying to hold together what was already collapsing. Clara woke up early. She made coffee, set the table with 2 cups even when he left without touching either. She tried. It was the verb she conjugated alone the most in those days. To triu. She tried to smile, tried to converse, tried to get Ethan to look at her the same way he looked at his glass and concrete projects, with fascination and attention. But his eyes had become foreign maps. There was no longer a path, only walls. Ethan arrived late, always smelling of cigarette smoke and boredom. He said he was overloaded with the new bid, with the firm, with his father's pressure. But Clara knew he was overloading himself with his own coldness. She felt, like someone noticing a leak in the roof, that something in her house was crumbling from within. That morning, fine rain tapped against the glass windows of the house in the ensanche. Clara looked at her reflection in the mirror. Sunken eyes, dry mouth, a trace of forgotten makeup under her chin. She decided not to cry. She showered, pulled her hair into a hurried bun, grabbed a coat, and went out. She carried a bag with freshly baked empanadas and an envelope. Inside, a small symbolic gift, a sketch of the project they designed together in their first month of marriage on tracing paper. They never built it, but Clara kept it. It was more than a draft. It was memory. It was roots. I'm going to the firm. I'm going to surprise him. She said it out loud, to no one. Perhaps to convince herself. She took the metro, got off at Plaza Zocodover, and walked to the commercial building where the Cole and Associates architecture firm was located. She climbed 3 flights of stairs, each one slower than the last. Her heart wasn't beating fast. It was shrinking. Each step seemed like a question. The hallway was silent. The main door was ajar. She could have knocked, but she pushed the door with her fingers and entered slowly. His voice was the first thing, low, muffled. Laughing. If we keep this up, we'll end up designing the wrong bed, he said, through stifled laughter. Then, the image. She saw. She saw Ethan sitting at the project table, among papers and rulers, his shirt half open, the secretary's fingers between the buttons. She saw the 2 of them close, laughing, their eyes closed. She saw her hand sliding down his neck as if she already knew the way. She saw the body that was once hers belonging to another presence. And something in her broke, but silently. Clara did not scream. She did not run. She did not slam the door. She did not throw the envelope to the floor. She simply stepped back, as if the scene in front of her was a slow-motion fire, as if looking too much meant letting the smell of betrayal soak into her skin. She descended the 3 flights of stairs with chilling dignity, the bag of empanadas still in her hand. The envelope remained. She left the building like someone leaving a burning house, but on the outside, she was intact. Inside, there was no longer a roof, no floor. She hailed a taxi and didn't look back. That night, Ethan came home as always, late, exhausted, without looking at her. He found a cold dinner on the table and a letter on the plate. 3 lines. I don't want explanations. I want distance. I want a divorce. She wasn't in the bedroom, nor the bathroom, nor the house. Ethan perhaps didn't understand at first. Maybe he thought it was a bluff, a crisis, a whim. But she didn't return. The next day, Clara's lawyer called. 2 days later, the separation process was already filed. And, for the first time in years, Ethan perceived the silence. Not the silence of someone's absence, but the silence of someone who never comes back. The secret. Mateo. The news arrived without warning, on a mild late spring day. A late period, a strange body, sharp intuition. She bought a pharmacy test and waited alone in the bathroom of the house she had shared with Ethan. The 2 lines appeared with cruel speed, without hesitation. There was the answer. She wasn't alone. She never would be again. She sat on the cold tile floor, the test between her fingers, her legs folded, her heart trying to organize its own beats. She should have cried. She didn't. She touched her still flat belly with the palm of her hand and whispered, without knowing why. Did you come? The news could have been light, but an old shadow covered everything. The memory flashed in her mind, clear, direct, threatening. If you get pregnant and we separate, I will take that child from you. The Coles have power. Never forget that. He had said that one night during an argument, long before the betrayal, when fighting already replaced intimacy, when she dared to say she dreamed of children. And he, with the coldness of someone who knows the weight of the family name, cut the dream in half with that dry, unwavering phrase. At the time, Clara laughed. She thought it was an exaggeration. But now, with those 2 lines on the test, the phrase resonated with a different gravity. It was a threat. And more, it was the memory of the man he truly was. She spent the following days in silence. She left the house only for appointments, always at alternative times. She avoided friends, neighbors, even family. Her small belly could still be hidden. But the fear grew. She knew what the Coles were capable of. She knew about Ethan's father's power. His contacts with judges, his political influence, the way they silenced scandals and manipulated judicial decisions. She had already heard stories. She had already seen it happen with his cousin, who lost custody of her son for being emotionally unstable. Instability, in that case, meant trying to get out of a sick marriage. Then she understood. She couldn't stay. The decision came in a sleepless early morning. Sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands pressing the pillow against her chest, she took stock. She had little money saved, a gold bracelet her grandmother had left her, some clothes, and the instinct to protect that small heart beating inside her. She called her mother in Granada. She didn't explain much, just said, "I need to go." Today, just the 2 of us. Can it be? On the other end of the line, there was silence. Then, a brief answer, "Oui." She packed in an hour, few clothes, documents, the pregnancy test tucked between the pages of a poetry book. She left the house before the sun rose. She called a taxi. She didn't look back. The apartment, once a home, was now an empty shell. Every corner still had his scent, and she could no longer stand that expensive perfume that hid so much venom. She arrived at the terminal with a racing pulse. She bought a one-way ticket. Getting on the bus, she sat near the window, wrapped in her coat, as if it were makeshift armor. She looked out as the vehicle pulled away. The streets of Toledo gradually faded, each streetlight, a memory left behind. She arrived in Granada shortly after noon. Her mother was at the door. She hugged her without asking questions, without demanding explanations. She just hugged her, tightly, silently, present. Clara cried, finally. A muffled cry, without scandalous tears. It was more a release than a desperation. In the first days, she didn't leave the room. She slept a lot. Or little. She spent hours with her hand over her belly, trying to imagine a future she couldn't quite see. Her mother cooked for two. She spoke little. It was as if she knew that silence could also be a hug. When she finally spoke, it was a Sunday. "Do you want to tell him?" Clara took a long time to answer. Then she shook her head. "No, I don't want to. I can't. But he is the father. He is the danger." Her mother didn't insist. The rebuilding, Clara Aranda. Weeks turned into months. Her belly grew. Along with it, her strength. Clara found a small technical drawing course offered by a local NGO. She started attending. Then, she got an internship at a modest architectural firm with a kind, widowed architect who taught her more than any university. There, she wasn't the ex-wife of the coal heir. She was just Clara, talented, thirsty to start anew. The pregnancy was difficult. Nausea, low blood pressure, insomnia. But she resisted. Every beat of the baby's heart was a reminder that she was alive. That choosing to run was choosing to live. Matteo was born one hot September afternoon. The labor was long, and when she finally held him, everything around her silenced. There was no pain, no fear, only him. His eyes opened, brown, immense, and looked at her as if they already knew her. Clara smiled. "You really came." That night, she wrote a single sentence in her diary. "From now on, everything is for him." And she kept her word. From the day she first held Matteo in her arms, Clara never wavered again. Not because there was no fear. It existed, throbbing in sleepless nights and uncertain afternoons. But she learned to use fear as fuel. Every step, every achievement, was taken with the steady hands of someone carrying her own world on her lap. Matteo grew up surrounded by affection. There were no luxuries, but there was firm ground. There was no powerful surname, but there was a clean, honest name. Clara learned to make rice with lentils in silence, to deal with night fevers without panicking, to tell stories of enchanted worlds, while her own eyes were red from fatigue. At first, she lived with her mother in a small apartment, on the second floor of an old building in the Realejo neighborhood. The room she shared with her son had peeling walls, but the windows overlooked a sky that seemed to understand her unspoken prayers. When Matteo turned 2, she got him a spot in the municipal nursery. Clara began working full-time at the same firm where she had interned, now as a project assistant. 3 years later, she received a partial scholarship to an architecture faculty. At night, she sat in the tiny living room and sketched freehand while Matteo slept. The lines she drew were no longer just facades or structures. They were maps of her survival. She had learned to transform absence into foundation, pain into concrete. Everything that once broke her was now part of what sustained her. She excelled. The professors saw something unusual in her, a rare blend of technical precision and contained emotion. She designed houses that seemed to understand people's emptiness. She chased after every lost class, did assignments while washing dishes, studied during pediatrician appointments, read by the edge of the bed, while Matteo asked for just one more minute before sleeping. She earned a full scholarship in the 3rd semester. Then, her first paid internship. And with that, she rented a small apartment just for them, 2 rooms, a narrow hallway, a balcony where she planted basil and lavender. She never told anyone about Ethan. Her college classmates imagined she was widowed. Some thought she was a single mother by choice. Clara didn't correct them. She didn't lie. But she didn't give anything away either. She guarded that part of her history like someone keeping broken glass, careful not to cut her fingers. For Matteo's birthdays, she made simple cakes and filled the apartment with recycled balloons. In the photos, only the 2 of them, mother and son. A silent portrait of everything she had built, without fanfare, without help, without surnames. Sometimes, she dreamed of him, not of Ethan, but of the child Matteo could have been if he had grown up with his father's presence. In some dreams, he ran in a huge garden holding 2 hands. In others, he said, "Mom, why didn't he come?" And Clara woke up sweating, swallowing a guilt she wasn't sure was justified. But she never hesitated. She never let the decision to have fled slip into regret. She knew what she had done. She knew why she had done it. And she knew that by doing so, she not only saved herself but also saved her son from growing up in the shadow of a name that never meant protection. At the age of 5, Matteo asked for the first time, "Mom, why don't I have a dad?" Clara knelt down, held his face in her hands, and replied, "Because you have me, and I never left you." Matteo didn't answer. He just leaned his head on her shoulder. And in that embrace, Clara understood that love was also a language spoken with presence. In her final year of college, she presented her thesis, a social housing project focused on single mothers. The jury was silent for a few seconds after the presentation. Then, they applauded. Her tutor hugged her with moist eyes. She left the room with the feeling of having rebuilt everything that had once been demolished. She got a job at an architecture firm focused on social projects. It wasn't Ethan's award-winning firm, but it was a space where her voice had weight. She bought a used bicycle, took Matteo to school pedaling. On Saturdays, they frequented the same corner ice cream parlor. She always ordered vanilla. He, mint chocolate chip. It was the only fixed habit of the week, the ritual of remembering that life also needed sweetness. And so, with small, dignified steps, Clara got there. A firm woman, mother of a child who smiled with his whole body, an admired professional, owner of her own story. She won, and she didn't need anyone to see it for it to be true. But now someone saw Ethan, the confrontation, stepping onto her ground. The image of the child wouldn't leave his head, so sharp it hurt. The features, the gait, the attentive silence that he himself had at 5 years old. The eyes, God, the eyes. As if time had folded over itself and returned to Ethan, the mirror of a past he never lived, but which now looked at him through the streets of Toledo with implacable naturalness. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't projection. It was the truth. In the days that followed the fleeting reunion, Ethan tried to convince himself that he didn't need to know more. He tried because he knew what would come next. Guilt, fear, shame. But he failed. In his office, he drew lines on boards that led nowhere. At night, he read reports he didn't retain. He started sentences and left them halfway. When someone asked if he was okay, He automatically replied with a clear, but inside, everything was noise. He hired someone discreet to investigate. He asked them to track Clara, but without invading, without causing a scandal. 2 days later, he received an envelope in hand. Granada, Realejo neighborhood, her mother's name as the apartment's leaseholder, the child's school, a first semester report card, enrollment photo. Name, Mateo Aranda. He didn't carry his last name. But the face was enough. Ethan stood there, documents on the table, as if observing the record of a life he never participated in. And with that, the inevitable question, what would he do with it? He called his driver. He asked him to prepare the car for a trip. He needed time to think, he said. But what he wanted, deep down, was time to undo. The trip to Granada was long, though short in kilometers. The car seemed smaller, the air denser. He didn't speak during the 4-hour drive. He just watched the landscape change with an immobile face. He thought about Clara, about the courage she had to disappear, about the courage he never had to be someone different. He arrived at the address, a discreet street, low buildings, children playing on the sidewalk. He got out slowly, his hands damp. He climbed the steps with silent footsteps. The doorbell was simple, round. He rang it once, and waited. When the door opened, the image in front of him disarmed him. Clara, her hair shorter, her face more mature, but the eyes the same, intense, clear, strong. She didn't seem surprised. She looked at him like someone who was already expecting him, like someone who already knew that someday this moment would come. "Ethan," she said. Without emotion, he didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her as if he still couldn't believe she was there. Real, alive, out of reach? "He's my son, isn't he?" The question came out like a stone. There was no accusatory tone, only truth, and an old fear mixed with a new one. Clara didn't look away. She didn't move. She just took a deep breath, firm. "Yes, Mateo is your son, but he is my world." The words fell between them like a verdict. For an instant, neither of them spoke. The silence grew louder. The sound of the street in the background, a dog barking, a ball bouncing on the asphalt, everything seemed distant, as if they were isolated inside a thick glass. Ethan tried to organize a thought, but his body spoke first, his hands trembling, his throat dry, the weight on his chest. He didn't know if he could enter. He didn't know if he should. "Why didn't you tell me?" She gave a bitter smile. Her eyes remained fixed on his, but there was a weariness there that didn't exist before. "Do you remember what you told me, a year before everything ended? If you get pregnant and we separate, I will take that child from you. The Coles have power. Never forget that." Ethan closed his eyes. He remembered. The phrase was real. He said it in anger, on any given night, and he never thought she would take it seriously. "Clara, You don't need to explain yourself," she interrupted him, with a gentle but firm gesture. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because he needs me whole, and I could only be whole far away from you." The words were like clean blades. There were no shouts, no tears, but every syllable carried the pain of years. "Can I see him?" She hesitated for the first time. Her eyes flickered, her body moved slightly. "He's at the park with my mother. He'll be back in half an hour. You can see him, but don't confuse things." "What things?" She looked at him deeply and replied, "You can be a father, but I am everything he knows, and I won't allow that to change." Ethan nodded, his gaze lowered. There was no room for dispute there. Only one possible path, entering the other's territory with respect. And he, finally, was ready to tread carefully. And in that moment, Standing in the doorway that had been closed to him for so long, Ethan felt what he had never truly felt. Guilt. Not the theatrical, performative guilt, but the guilt that hurts because it recognizes, that burns because it is true. That is silent because it knows it has been wrong. Clara stepped aside, making space for him to enter. And so, without rituals, without hugs, without promises, the story began to reopen. Final reflection, Ethan entered Clara's apartment with the same feeling of invading a sanctuary. It was a small, modest space, but clean, alive. The furniture didn't match, but every object seemed to have been placed there with an intimate purpose. There were children's drawings taped to the fridge, a plant on the windowsill, a crooked lamp next to a worn armchair, and in the center of it all, the subtle scent of lavender, the same one she used on her pillow when they still slept together, although now it seemed like a different perfume, more mature, more hers. Ethan saw what Clara meant. The future wasn't about redemption. It was about responsibility. And next to that woman he once loved, he finally understood that she was not just the mother of his son. She was unbreakable, and that he could never attain. He understood it. Not in the arrogant way of someone who finally understands a woman, but like someone who, after a long time, recognizes the exact void he left behind. And the hardest thing to accept was that Clara was no longer in that void. She filled it alone. With silence, with struggle, with her own hands. With the precise architecture of someone who learned to build from the rubble. He saw it now, in every one of her gestures, in the way she organized Mateo's life with a firm and affectionate routine, in the way she spoke to his schoolmates' parents with a confident voice, unafraid of judgment, in the way she wore simple clothes that seemed tailor-made, as if her body had learned to fit exactly where it wanted to. Clara flourished, and he was just a spectator. Ethan began to accompany Mateo more often. He took his son to the park on alternate Saturdays. Clara's mother supervised him with an eagle's eye, never hostile, but always attentive. Clara trusted her instinct. It was like an invisible net of protection. The child would never be completely alone with Ethan. There would always be a watchful eye nearby, and Ethan never complained about it. He accepted it, because he knew he had no right to ask for more than that. One morning, after dropping Mateo off at school, Ethan saw Clara across the street. She was wearing a blue skirt, low heels, a folder under her arm, and a cup of coffee in her hand. She was talking on the phone, concentrated, walking quickly. She was so clear, so solid in that instant, that Ethan stopped to observe. He saw a woman he didn't know. A woman that time had sculpted with precision. She crossed the street, hung up the phone, and saw him. She stopped in front of him. Her eyes weren't cold. They were serene, like someone who no longer expects anything. And precisely because of that, she doesn't need to protect herself. "Do you need something?" she asked simply. "No," he replied, hesitant. I was going to say you look different. I'm alive. That's it. And you are learning to look." She walked past him without waiting for an answer, and that echoed in him as a reminder. There are pains that don't heal. They transform. And Clara transformed. Later that same day, Ethan opened his laptop and searched her name. He found an article. Clara Aranda, architect and urban planner, winner of a regional award for a sustainable social housing project. The text spoke of her with reverence. It mentioned her education, her trajectory, her focus on vulnerable communities. No influential surnames, no inheritances. Everything was merit. Every paragraph was a confirmation of what he was already beginning to accept. Clara not only survived, she became someone else. And he remained rich. He continued signing projects, accumulating awards, attending gala dinners. But everything he carried in his pockets, the contacts, the promises, the contracts, now seemed lighter than a dry leaf compared to the concrete weight of the presents Clara earned with her own story. The power of the Coles? Impotent there. Because Clara was no longer accessible through influence. She could not be bent by surnames. She was not for sale. Ethan understood it, not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. And looking at Mateo, seeing him grow up with the tenderness of someone who was loved unconditionally, he understood that everything Clara built, the balance, the clarity, the unconditional love, cannot be bought. It is not inherited. It is only earned. And he arrived too late. Now tell me, if you were in Clara's place, would you have done the same thing? Would you have left without telling him about the pregnancy? Comment below. I really want to know what you would do. And if this story touched you in any way, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. See you in the next story. A sterile millionaire can't believe it. When a humble country girl saves his life and gives him what he always wanted. Before we dive into this incredible story of fate, heartbreak, and miracles, do us a huge favor and hit that like button to support our channel. And make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an emotional roller coaster like this one. Thank you. The roar of the V8 engine was a feral scream against the serene morning silence of Napa Valley. Inside the gleaming black Aston Martin, Ethan Cole barely heard it. The only sound that registered was the venomous echo of his ex-wife's final words, words that had become the relentless soundtrack to his hollow existence. You will never be a father, Ethan. You are a failure, a dead end. His knuckles were white on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. Miles of pristine vineyards, bathed in the golden California sunrise, blurred into a meaningless green and gold smear on either side of the winding country road. This sprawling estate, the envy of the wine-making world, his ancestral home, felt less like a paradise and more like a gilded cage, a constant, beautiful reminder of the one thing his fortune couldn't buy, a legacy. The memory, sharp and cruel, made his foot press harder on the accelerator. 100, 110, 120 miles per hour. The speedometer was climbing, but he was going nowhere, just racing from a ghost. That's why he didn't see it until it was far too late. The massive, ancient oak tree that had fallen across the road during a storm the night before. A final, unmovable obstacle. What do you think drives a person to such a point of reckless despair? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The impact wasn't a sound. It was a physical event that tore the world apart. A deafening symphony of tortured metal, shattering glass, and the sickening crunch of the car's carbon fiber bodywork disintegrating against solid wood. The Aston Martin spun through the air in a terrifying, weightless ballet before flipping. Once, twice, and finally landing upside down in a ditch, its magnificent engine groaning its last breath. Silence. Then, pain. A blinding, all-consuming agony shot up from Ethan's left leg, which was pinned and grotesquely twisted under the crushed dashboard. The seatbelt, his savior, was now his captor, cutting deep into his shoulder. The coppery scent of his own blood mixed with the acrid smell of leaking gasoline and scorched earth, filling the cramped, inverted space. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound swallowed by the indifferent calm of the valley. As the sun climbed higher, baking the mangled wreck, Ethan's hope began to drain away with his strength. His vision blurred, the edges turning dark. He was going to die here, alone, a forgotten headline in the business section. As his consciousness began to fade, a shadow fell across the shattered windshield. A figure, silhouetted against the blinding sun. An angel? My God, are you okay in there? A voice called out, laced with frantic urgency. Ethan could only manage a faint groan. Help! Me! The angel didn't hesitate. Clara Evans, her hands still smudged with soil from her morning's work in her small flower nursery, threw herself at the wreck. With a strength born of pure adrenaline, she wrenched at the buckled driver's side door. It groaned in protest, but she pulled again and again, her muscles screaming until, with a final metallic shriek, it gave way. With breathtaking determination for someone so seemingly delicate, she crawled inside, her focus absolute. She worked the release on the seatbelt, her small hands fumbling, but relentless, until he was free. Then she braced herself against the roof and with a surge of impossible strength, helped to heave the mangled dashboard just enough to free his leg. Every second was an eternity, but she finally dragged him, inch by agonizing inch, from the metallic tomb. As she knelt beside him, tearing a strip from her own cotton skirt to fashion a makeshift tourniquet around his bleeding leg, Ethan looked up at her face. Framed by loose strands of chestnut hair and smudged with dirt, her hazel eyes were filled with a fierce compassion that cut through his haze of pain. It was the urgency, the courage, the sheer, unhesitating humanity in her that captivated him, even as he teetered on the brink of unconsciousness. "Stay with me, okay? I'm going for help," she said, her voice a lifeline. He managed to grab her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't leave." Clara looked from his desperate eyes to the empty road and back again. She gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. "Okay," she promised. "I'll stay, but we need help, and we need it now." Waving her arms frantically, she flagged down a farm tractor chugging along in the distance. Within what felt like a lifetime, Ethan was being carefully loaded into an ambulance, the piercing wail of its siren finally breaking the valley's peace. As they sped away towards Queen of the Valley Medical Center, the last thing he saw was the face of the woman who had pulled him from the jaws of death. He didn't know her name, but he knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that destiny had just violently intervened in his life. For the next few days, in the sterile white world of his private hospital room, the image of Clara's face was a persistent, haunting fever dream. She was a stranger, yet he felt an inexplicable connection to her, the woman who had appeared in his darkest hour. Who was she? And why did he feel that their story, born in the wreckage of his despair, had only just begun? Upon his release, hobbling on crutches and feeling more alive than he had in years, Ethan had a singular mission: to find her. One of his vineyard foremen, a lifelong local, recognized his description instantly. "Ah, you mean Clara Evans," he said. "Poor girl. A widow. Lives in that little cottage over by Miller Creek. Sells the most beautiful flowers at the farmer's market on Saturdays. Keeps to herself, mostly." When Ethan finally arrived at her small, rustic cottage, the scene that greeted him stole his breath. He found her there, kneeling in a sprawling garden of vibrant, fragrant orchids, her hands covered in rich, dark earth, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the late afternoon sun. She was a part of this place, as natural and beautiful as the flowers she nurtured. "Clara!" he called out, his voice hoarse with emotion. She looked up, startled, wiping her hands on her apron. A look of recognition, then concern, washed over her face. "Ethan! You're okay." "I'm okay because of you," he said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. He paused, leaning on his crutch, his eyes locking with hers. "I had to thank you. I can't just forget that you risked your life for me." Clara offered a small, hesitant smile, but a shadow flickered in her eyes, a hint of a sorrow he couldn't yet understand. "You don't need to thank me, Ethan. Just live. That's enough. Her simple, profound words struck him. For years, he had merely existed, going through the motions of a life defined by wealth and status. But he hadn't truly lived. It's not just gratitude, Clara, he pressed, taking another step. I felt like I needed to see you again. Could we maybe talk? I promise I won't take up much of your time. She studied him for a long moment, her gaze searching. What did she see? A broken man? A rich man looking to pay a debt? Finally, with a small sigh, she gestured toward her cottage. All right, she said softly. Come in. I was just about to make some tea. It helps calm the nerves. He followed her into the simple home, where the air was filled with the scent of fresh brewed herbal tea and drying flowers hanging from the rafters. She led him to a rustic wooden chair at her small kitchen table. How's the leg? She asked, her voice filled with genuine concern, as she poured steaming tea into 2 mismatched ceramic mugs. Improving. It still hurts like hell, but I'll survive, he said, trying to make light of it. Thanks to you. As she brought the mugs to the table, her eyes fell on the bulky dressing beneath his pant leg. Can I take a look, just to make sure it's not getting infected? He nodded, surprised again by her gentle, take-charge nature. She knelt before him, her touch delicate, but sure as she inspected the wound. It's healing well. You're taking good care of it. As she returned to her seat, he took a sip of the tea, the warmth spreading through him like a balm. Clara, I don't think you have any idea what you did for me out there. I want you to know, if you ever need anything at all, I'm here for you. She looked away, a familiar discomfort settling over her features. I didn't do anything special, Ethan. And believe me, there are more important things in the world. Like what? He asked, intrigued. Clara hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Some things are just complicated. Not everything can be fixed with money or grand gestures. Ethan saw that shadow in her eyes again, a deep-seated sadness that he couldn't comprehend. Before he could press further, she stood abruptly. But enough about that. Drink your tea. It will help you rest. He nodded, but as he sat in her quiet, fragrant kitchen, he knew that this woman held secrets. Something in her gaze, in her carefully chosen words, captivated him, and he felt, with a growing certainty, that he had to uncover the story behind the woman who had saved his life. The silence in the small kitchen was thick with unspoken words as Ethan held the warm mug of tea. The space was humble, but filled with a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in his own cavernous, empty mansion. So what's your story, Clara? He asked gently, breaking the silence. How did you end up here? She offered a faint, melancholy smile. After my husband, Daniel, passed away, I needed a new start. This little house was all I could afford. I started growing flowers to sell at the market. It's hard work, but it's honest. Ethan nodded, sensing there was more to her story than she was letting on. The mention of her late husband was fleeting, but the pain was still palpable. You do all this by yourself? It can't be easy. It's not, she admitted with a shrug. But you find a way. The neighbors help out when they can. That's how it works in a small community. As she spoke, he studied her. There was no plea for pity in her voice, no hint of self-importance. She possessed an authenticity that made him feel profoundly inadequate, his vast fortune suddenly feeling like a pile of meaningless paper compared to her quiet resilience. Have you ever thought about leaving? He asked, the question sounding clumsy and patronizing as soon as it left his lips. Going to a bigger city where there are more opportunities? Clara laughed, but it was a sound tinged with bitterness. Opportunities for who, Ethan? People like me don't have many options in the big city. Besides, this is my home. I love what I do, even if it isn't glamorous. He looked down, ashamed. I didn't mean to offend you. I know, she said, her voice softening. It's just that sometimes people don't understand. But it's okay. He looked around her kitchen again, at the hand-embroidered art on the walls and the simple vase of wildflowers on the table. It was a life built from scratch, filled with care and intention. "Have you had dinner?" she asked suddenly, shifting the mood. "No, not yet." "Well, you're not going anywhere with that leg," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "I'll make something simple. It's not much, but it'll do." He wanted to protest, to tell her he could have his personal chef deliver a 5-star meal in under an hour, but something in her firm kindness stopped him. He simply nodded as she moved to the small pantry. As she gathered potatoes, onions, and a rustic loaf of bread, he watched, mesmerized by her effortless grace. He was so accustomed to people who performed, who were always trying to impress him. But Clara had no idea of the scale of his wealth. To her, he was just a man she had helped, a neighbor. "And you?" she asked, her back still to him. "How did you end up in Napa? You seem different from the people around here." He hesitated. He hadn't yet revealed that he was the owner of the sprawling Cole estate, the legendary vineyard that bordered her small property. He decided on the truth. "I own the vineyard next door." Clara froze, a pan held mid-air. Her eyes widened as she turned to face him, a look of shock and perhaps a little discomfort on her face. The big estate on the other side of the ridge? That's the one." She placed the pan on the stove, her hands trembling slightly. I had no idea. I thought you were a manager or something." He chuckled softly. "That's exactly what I wanted you to think. I moved back here a few years ago, trying to get away from my old life. I don't like to talk about it much." She nodded, but he saw her expression shift. He could almost hear the gears turning in her head, calculating the immense chasm between their worlds. "Well, that explains the sports car you managed to wreck," she said, a hint of her previous lightness returning. "Are you upset?" he asked, worried the revelation had erected a wall between them. "No, of course not," she said with a smile, but there was an edge to her tone that bothered him. "It's just curious, thinking of someone like you sitting here in my kitchen." He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he wasn't so different, but he didn't know how. As the smell of a simple, home-cooked stew began to fill the air, Clara served dinner. It was a rustic vegetable and lentil soup with thick slices of bread, but to Ethan, it tasted more satisfying than any Michelin-starred meal he'd ever had. "This is delicious," he said with genuine appreciation. "Thank you. It's nothing special, just what I could make with what I have." "Sometimes the simple things are the best," he replied, looking at her meaningfully. They continued to talk as they ate, and Ethan felt a novel sense of ease. There were no pretenses, no hidden agendas. It was just an honest conversation, and it touched him in a way he hadn't expected. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair, feeling a contentment that had been absent from his life for years. "I think you've saved my life twice now, Clara." She looked at him, puzzled. "Twice?" "Yes, first in the accident, and now by reminding me what's real." A faint blush colored her cheeks, but she said nothing. As silence settled between them again, Ethan felt a deep desire to prolong this moment, this connection. Yet at the same time, he sensed that mystery about her, an invisible barrier he knew he'd have to breach to truly understand the woman who was so unlike anyone he'd ever known. The days that followed settled into a comfortable rhythm. Ethan, using the pretense of wanting his neglected gardens revived, hired Clara. It was an excuse, and they both knew it, but it was one they silently agreed to. Each morning, she would arrive, her quiet presence transforming not just the overgrown flower beds, but the very atmosphere of the estate. Ethan found himself drawn to the garden whenever she was there. He'd watch from his study window as she worked with a focused passion, her hands deftly pulling weeds, pruning roses, and coaxing life back into the dormant soil. He saw how she spoke to the plants, her voice a low, encouraging murmur. She didn't just garden. She nurtured. "You don't have to stare, you know," she said one afternoon, without looking up from a stubborn patch of lavender, a playful smile on her lips. Caught, Ethan laughed and limped out onto the terrace. "I'm not staring. I'm supervising my investment." She finally looked up, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "And how is your investment doing, Mr. Cole?" "It's the best decision I've made in years," he said, his voice more serious than he intended. One afternoon, as Clara was training a climbing rose onto a trellis, the sky turned a menacing shade of gray. The wind picked up, whipping through the valley with a sudden fury, carrying the scent of rain. "Clara!" Ethan called from the house. "You need to get inside." "It's fine. I'm almost done," she yelled back, her determination overriding her common sense. Before he could argue, a violent gust tore the trellis from her grasp, sending it clattering to the ground. Clara stumbled, shielding her face from the dust and debris. Ethan didn't hesitate. Ignoring the sharp protest from his healing leg, he rushed out into the burgeoning storm. "Come on, you're going to get hurt." He grabbed her hand, his touch sending an unexpected jolt through them both, and pulled her toward the safety of the house just as the heavens opened up. They collapsed inside, soaked and breathless, the sound of the torrential rain drumming against the roof. Clara was shivering slightly, and Ethan's protective instincts took over. "I'll get you a towel," he said, his voice laced with concern. He returned a moment later and lit the grand fireplace in the living room. Soon, the space was filled with a warm, comforting glow. "Are you always this stubborn?" he asked, a gentle tease in his voice as she dried her hair. She laughed, a genuine, beautiful sound. "I just don't like leaving things unfinished." "Well, sometimes you have to remember to take care of yourself first," he said, his gaze intense. She looked up at him, and the silence that fell between them was different. It was charged, filled with an unspoken energy. "Why are you doing all this, Ethan?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. "Hiring me for the garden, spending all this time with me. It doesn't make sense for someone like you." He took a step closer, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "Because I want to be near you, Clara," he confessed, the truth feeling both terrifying and liberating. "Because you remind me of what's real and what's important. And to be honest, being with you is the only thing that's made any sense at all lately." She was silent, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something else he couldn't quite decipher. "My life is complicated, you know," she said finally. "Everyone's life is complicated, Clara. Not like mine," she insisted, a deep sadness coloring her words. "I have limits, things I can't change." "I'm not asking you to change anything," he said, taking another step closer. "I just want you to know that I'm here, if you need me." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, as if trying to decide if she could trust him. "You don't know what you're getting into." "Maybe not," he admitted softly, "but I think it's worth finding out." That night, the storm trapped Clara at the estate. After a simple dinner, they prepared together, a task that felt more intimate than any of the lavish dates of his past. They sat by the fire. He finally told her everything about Isabel, the cold diagnosis of his infertility, and the brutal way his marriage had dissolved, leaving him feeling like a hollow shell of a man. "She made it clear that I wasn't enough," he confessed, the old wound feeling raw. "That if I couldn't be a father, I was worthless." Clara reached out and placed her hand gently on his. "That's not true, Ethan. You are so much more than that." He looked at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," he whispered. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that." He knew then, with absolute clarity, that he was falling in love with her. He didn't know what secrets she was holding back, what walls she had built around her heart. But as the storm raged outside, he made a silent vow. He would be patient. He would be strong. And he would do whatever it took to break through and show her that they could build something real together. The morning after the storm, the world seemed washed clean. Sunlight streamed through the large windows of the living room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Clara awoke on the plush sofa, a thick cashmere blanket tucked around her. The fire had died down to glowing embers, and the house was perfectly still. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel a sense of peace, a feeling so foreign it was almost startling. Then, the reality of her situation, waking up in the home of a millionaire who was rapidly becoming far more than an employer, rushed back in, bringing with it a familiar wave of anxiety. Ethan found her standing by the window, looking out at the rain-soaked gardens. He was holding a tray with 2 steaming mugs of coffee and a plate of freshly baked scones. "Good morning," he said softly. I fell asleep. "I'm sorry," she stammered, feeling flustered. "Don't be," he said, setting the tray down. "You were exhausted. Besides, I'm glad you stayed." His presence filled the room, not with intimidation, but with a quiet strength that was both comforting and terrifying to her. As they sipped their coffee, the unspoken confession of the night before hung in the air between them. Clara knew she couldn't keep her own secrets locked away if she was going to let this man into her life, no matter how much it scared her. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling, slightly. "There's something you need to know about me." He turned his full attention to her, his expression open and patient. "My husband, Daniel, he didn't just die. He was a soldier. He was killed in Afghanistan 3 years ago." The words came out in a rush, as if she feared they would get stuck if she paused. "We were high school sweethearts. He was my whole world. When he died, a part of me died with him." She took a shaky breath. "But that's not all. A few weeks after he was deployed for the last time, I found out I was pregnant." Ethan's heart clenched, but he remained silent, letting her tell her story in her own time. "I was so excited. I wrote him letters every day, telling him about the baby, about our future, but I never got to tell him in person." Tears welled in her eyes, tears she had held back for years. "There was a complication with the pregnancy, a rare condition. I lost the baby. It was a little girl. I lost her just a month before I lost Daniel." The confession hung in the air, heavy and heartbreaking. "I came here to escape," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "To start over where no one knew my story, where I wasn't the tragic widow. The flowers, they were the only thing that felt alive when everything else felt dead. They were my way of holding on." Finally, he understood the source of her sadness, the reason for the walls around her heart. She wasn't just a widow. She was a woman who had lost her husband and her child, her entire future, in one devastating blow. Without a word, Ethan moved to the sofa and sat beside her. He didn't offer empty platitudes or easy reassurances. He simply wrapped his arms around her and held her as she finally let herself cry, her body shaking with the force of 3 years of pent-up grief. He held her tight, absorbing her pain, his own heart aching for her. "I'm so sorry, Clara," he whispered into her hair. "You've been carrying all of this alone." They stayed like that for a long time, the silence broken only by her quiet sobs. When her tears finally subsided, she looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "I'm scared, Ethan," she admitted. "I'm scared of feeling anything again. It hurts too much." "I'm scared too," he confessed, his voice raw. "But maybe we can be scared together." In that moment of shared vulnerability, the last of the barriers between them crumbled. It wasn't about a rich man and a poor girl anymore. It was about 2 broken people finding solace in each other's arms, 2 souls who had been shipwrecked by life finding a safe harbor. Just as this fragile new beginning was taking root, the past made its unwelcome return. The sleek silver sports car that pulled up the long driveway was a jarring intrusion into their peaceful world. Isabel, Ethan's ex-wife, emerged from the car, looking every bit the polished, formidable woman he remembered. "Ethan," she called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she spotted them on the terrace. I was in the area and thought I'd pick up the last of my things. Clara stiffened in Ethan's arms, and he felt a protective anger surge through him. Isabel, he said, his voice cold and steady. This isn't a good time. Isabel's eyes flickered to Clara, her gaze sweeping over her with blatant disdain. Oh, I see, she said, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. You found a new project. How quaint. The rich man and the humble little gardener. That's enough, Ethan warned, standing up to place himself between the two women. But Clara, wiping the last of her tears away, found a strength she didn't know she had. It's all right, Ethan, she said, her voice quiet but firm. She met Isabel's condescending stare without flinching. I'm Clara Evans. It's a pleasure to meet you. Isabel laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. Darling, I'm sure it is. Let me give you some advice. Don't get too attached. Ethan has a condition. He can't give you the one thing a woman like you would want from a man like him. A family. The words were meant to be a fatal blow, but they had an unintended effect. They solidified Ethan's resolve. Get your things and get out, Isabel, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. You are no longer welcome here. As Isabel swept into the house, Clara turned to Ethan, her face pale. She's right, isn't she? About you. That's what the doctor said, he admitted. It's why she left me. Clara looked at him, her hazel eyes filled with a new, fierce emotion. She didn't leave you because you couldn't have children, she said with sudden clarity. She left because she's incapable of real love. And in that moment, as Isabel's venomous words hung in the air, a dizzy spell washed over Clara. She swayed, her hand flying to her head. Clara, are you okay? Ethan cried, catching her as her legs gave way, and she fainted in his arms. The frantic drive to the hospital was a blur of terror for Ethan. Holding Clara's limp hand, his mind raced with 1,000 horrible possibilities. Isabel, forgotten in the back seat, remained silent, her earlier bravado replaced by a shocked unease. In the sterile, impersonal waiting room, every tick of the clock was a form of torture. Finally, a doctor with kind eyes emerged. Mr. Cole? Ethan shot to his feet. How is she? Is she going to be okay? The doctor smiled, a warm, reassuring expression. She's going to be fine, Mr. Cole. She's just dehydrated and exhausted. But there's something else. Something you should know. Ethan braced himself. Ms. Evans is pregnant, the doctor announced. About 8 weeks along, and from the initial ultrasound, it appears she's expecting triplets. The world tilted on its axis. Pregnant. Triplets. The words didn't compute. From behind him, Isabel let out a strangled gasp. That's impossible, she declared, striding forward. He can't have children. He's sterile. The doctor looked from Isabel's furious face to Ethan's stunned one. Ethan finally found his voice, a whisper filled with dawning, earth-shattering realization. He looked at Isabel, truly seeing the deceit in her eyes for the first time. It was never me, was it? He said, the pieces of his past clicking into place with horrifying clarity. It was you. You were the one who couldn't have children. Isabel's face crumpled, the lie she had maintained for years finally exposed. I couldn't handle it, Ethan, she cried. You had everything. I couldn't be the broken one. He looked at her, not with anger, but with a profound, weary pity. You made me believe I was a failure, he said quietly. You let me carry that pain, all because you were too cowardly to face the truth. Without another word, Isabel turned and fled, her clicking heels echoing her defeat down the long hospital corridor. The doctor gently touched Ethan's arm. I think she needs you now. Ethan walked into Clara's room as if in a dream. She was awake, looking pale, but peaceful. Ethan, she whispered. He knelt by her bed, taking her hand. You gave me quite a scare, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry," she said, her thumb stroking his knuckles. "Don't be," he said, a slow, wondrous smile spreading across his face as tears streamed down his cheeks. "You just gave me the greatest news of my entire life." Her brow furrowed in confusion. "News?" He laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "You're pregnant, Clara, and not just with one baby. We're having triplets." Her eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth as tears of shock and happiness filled her eyes. "What? Triplets?" "3 of them," he confirmed, pressing her hand to his lips. "You're carrying 3 little miracles, Clara." "Oh, Ethan," she sobbed, pulling him into a fierce embrace. "I was so scared, but now I feel like everything is going to be all right." "It will be," he promised, holding her tight, feeling the profound shift in his universe. "Because we're in this together, and no matter what comes next, we'll face it." In that hospital room, surrounded by the beeps and hums of machines, they made a silent promise to never let the ghosts of the past or the judgment of the world define them. As Ethan leaned in to kiss her, it felt as though all the pain and loneliness they had endured had led them to this perfect, miraculous moment. A new life, a new vintage was beginning for them. Richer, fuller, and more beautiful than anything Ethan Cole could have ever imagined. The love that blossomed so unexpectedly in the heart of Napa Valley became the foundation of a family built not on wealth or status, but on resilience, truth, and second chances. Ethan, who once believed he was cursed to a life without heirs, discovered that his greatest legacy wouldn't be his vineyards, but the 3 beautiful children he raised with the woman who saved him in every way that a person can be saved. Clara, who thought her heart was buried with her past, learned that love could grow again, stronger and more vibrant than before, even in the most wounded soil. Their story serves as a powerful reminder that our deepest pains can often lead to our greatest joys, and that the family we are destined for is not always the one we plan, but the one that finds us when we need it most. True wealth is not what we own, but who we have to love. And sometimes, the most devastating crash is the very thing that sets us on the right path. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone you love, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales that will warm your soul. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you in the next story.